Okay, so like we discussed in class about granular synthesis, we wanted to find some easier ways to work with granular synthesis in a DAW like Logic. So we're going to look at the granular mode in Logic's Alchemy synthesizer and realize that there's a very kind of simple approach to creating some of the textures that we discussed in class. So again, granular synthesis, and I've gotten this from the Sound on Sound website. I think it's a pretty good, concise definition of it. It describes it as a catch-all term. So as it states here, for a number of different audio systems that work by using tiny snippets of sound that can be manipulated individually and are recombined to generate the final output. So the majority of granular systems available use audio files, samples as their raw material. Samples are sliced up into a series of tiny sections, each usually between 1/100th and 1/10th of a second in duration. You can think of that as actually anywhere between 5 milliseconds even to 500 milliseconds. It's not really totally agreed on what characterizes a grain duration, but we can think of them as probably at least sound sources that are smaller than 300 milliseconds. So each slice is known as a grain, and a sequence of grains is called a grain table. And sometimes we can call a sequence of grains a grain cloud. We can use more creative language to describe more of a textural description of what we want to create. In software, we think of the grain table in which it plays back all of the grains that are extracted from a given sample. So in this case, in the original sequence, you might think of them being played at original speed, or they're pitch shifted or filtered in some ways. So the overall goal is really one of kind of experimental synthesis, sound making. And that's what I really like about granular synthesis, is kind of the unpredictability of sounds that you can get. Let's open up Logic. Just we'll get a default MIDI instrument because we're going to load the Alchemy synthesizer here. So in the inspector right here, we'll go to the drop-down menu. You'll see that I have Alchemy at the top. I've opened it before. If you don't see it, you can scroll down to the synthesizer drop-down menu and select Alchemy. Okay, I'll go ahead and close my preset library. This is the default interface for Alchemy, and what we want to do is use this to import audio so that the program can analyze the file, the signal, so that we're able to perform granular synthesis operations on it. Because Alchemy, has a default setup where these global in the global pane right here, where all the sound sources. Just for this demonstration, I'm going to turn B, C, and D off, and I'm only going to work with the also the A engine here. So it's defaults to a square wave oscillator. So what I can do is I can import sound directly into this oscillator. Normally you'd import audio this way. You can load it's kind of a basic waveform, or any of the waveforms here, like you normally would be doing in kind of ground up synthesis. But what we'll do is we'll import a pre-existing sample, and I'm going to go to the loop browser and grab that. Because I want to work with vocal samples right now, I'll just go into my loop library and I'll grab a vocal sample here.
Got me, yeah.
Okay, so what I did was I grabbed the sample and loaded it in. So you can do this quickly by taking a sample from your desktop, from another folder, or directly from the loop library. And as soon as you bring it into that, you saw what I did, I actually found the granular window here. It gives you 4 options, and granular is in the lower left, and then just drop it into that pane. What that does is that imports the audio specifically only in granular mode, so it's not the sampler mode. And you could actually put it in any of these sources, right? But since I'm only working with A and I'm only going to be working with one sample, that's what I'm doing here. So right now, this will show us the main controls, the core controls for the granular mode. And those are the grain size right here, the grain density. And so the size is the length of the grain. You can see it defaults to 116 milliseconds. The density is the number of grains or the overlap of the grains. And together, that's going to control the smoothness versus the texture of the sound. The more grains that you are working with, the smoother that texture is going to be because they're going to be overlapping each other. So you can create more kind of continuous textures. Then we have a volume knob here of the overall output level. We have something called R time, which stands for the random position, the random time. So that will be the random position offset of the grains. And then a random panning. 0%, there's none, and it goes all the way to 100%. So that random stereo spread will be from 0% to 100%. Then you have a little section here which allows you to select the number of taps to create a delay in the grains. And this is nice because this simply re-triggers the attack phase of when you're using your MIDI keyboard or your sequencing in your track. You can set the number of taps from just 1, which is default, to 8. And that will re-trigger the attack phase, well, at least up to eight times. And then the tap spacing here from 0% to 100%, that's just the spacing as the values as a percentage of the overall sound duration. And then you can control right here. You see the stereo offset. Now the shape of the grain, this refers to the envelope of each grain. So a Tukey window, I think it's named after a mathematician who developed this shape. It's very kind of, it's a very rigid shape, almost like a Gaussian curve or a kind of a bell curve, but it has sharp edges up on the top. If you click on this, you can see that there are other grain shapes that you can select. So the hand window is going to be a little bit smoother sound compared to the Tukey, but I would say just really explore this. Or a needle, which is a very, very narrow envelope, which is going to make it a lot more noisy. And then just some simple ramps up and down, and then other shapes that are going to be a little bit harsher sounding. I would say the Tukey and the hand window are going to give you the more smooth shape, so you won't hear the attack and endpoints of each grain. I'll go ahead and leave it default on this right now. So what we can do is in granular synthesis is once we have this imported, like we took from our loop library, I can edit the sound, or at least I can tell the synthesizer to start playing within the waveform at a specific point. So I can select that by putting a start endpoint, a start and an endpoint. So here, so you can see I took the start and the end, and I'm only going to work with just one little section of my sample. What I'll do here is I'll grab my keyboard so you can hear this. So the default right now, it's what it's doing is I'm holding down my MIDI keyboard note, the C2. It's only going to be playing that specific part of the sample. And you can hear already there's a delay in there. Once you decide what section, or if you want to work with the entire sample, or just a really small duration of it, this can have a really important result in what the output sound is of your grains. And I think it's really fun just to work with very small sections of a sample to get inside the sound. So what I'll do is I'll just set this to the beginning and the end of her. of her vowel sound. It sounds like a vowel. Yeah. And I'll do this. I'm going to turn this send up, so a little bit quiet, sending it through the filter so we can hear this a little bit better. Back, I'll turn the tap spacing down. I'll turn the number of taps up to reinforce the sound and be a little louder. And you can hear it's just repeating that section of the grain. Now, notice that if I change the size of the grain, get more of that grainy or granular sound, right? And it'll be most obvious if I go to a very short duration, and I'm going to bring it all the way down to just one grain stream. So my grain table is now set to 1 grain. And there you can hear that very kind of piecing together or kind of stitched together sound. Now the speed of the grain will actually have quite a dramatic result. If I do this, the default was 100%, I'm going to slow it down to half the original speed. And because the time stretching quality, you also have this really kind of neat way to get inside and freeze the sound. So if I go lower down to maybe 15%, or around 15%, you'll notice that time stretching quality that you're probably all familiar with when we were talking about the pulse stretch will be more evident in this sound. Yeah. And in this case, I'm going to turn my random time up, and my stereo, I'm going to randomize my stereo spread to make it a little bit more interesting overall in the texture. Okay. So let me go back in and edit that sound, and I'm going to get a little bit of a narrower piece of that sample. Yeah, and notice when I trigger that sound, it's going from start to end and it's just looping it. You can actually change the loop mode over here. So if I want a slightly different kind of feeling of motion in that sound, I might want to go forward, back, which is going to bounce from the forward, hit the end point, and then go back, and it's going to continue that. And it changes, kind of makes it more of a wave-like sound. Yeah, very grainy sound, just as we would expect. And let me zoom in here. Great, okay. So once I go in here, I can also look at how I can maybe fine tune this, and I can be more excruciating with my tuning if I want to detune that granular sample, and so forth. So all of these parameters, you're probably, if you've worked with Alchemy before and you've worked with some in sampler mode, you'll know that it's very similar. But all of this right here is where most of your granular synthesis experimentation is going to happen. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create just a little pattern so we can maybe think of our granular synthesis as a synthesizer that would be used in a sequence, let's say a rhythmic sequence or a melody. I'll go up and set a pattern region here, and I'm just going to make just a looping melody. And what I'll do is instead of doing the default C major, I'll just do a minor pentatonic. Set to 16 steps here, and I'll just put in a little just kind of a little boring pattern, but okay, so now I have built this synthesizer through a granular synthesis engine. And as I'm playing here, opening this up, this might be a good time where you can start to change these parameters, and maybe as you're building your sequence, you can automate all of these parameters over time to get some really interesting results, so that you can hear how changing the granular synthesis over time will really give the sound a very organic and very unusual quality. So you've got your core controls, you have your variation, right, through the stereo and working in the stereo field. You have the ability to kind of re-trigger this with the number of taps and the tap spacing. And ultimately, the grain shape is going to also influence your tone shaping, right? So that envelope per grain might reduce clicks, or it might add clicks in if you want to have more of a glitchy like sound. And as you're kind of working with the modulation, where you're updating the modulation per grain, you can create some really interesting buzzy-like sounds, fragmented sounds, or you can smooth it out by adding more grain density. Let's actually just play around with that a little bit so that we can hear some of the variety of timbres that we can get out of this sample now. Okay, and while that's playing, changing the position of where I want that to be triggered. And I think we've heard enough of that sequence. So that's just a really basic kind of way to think about how you can start creating your own granular synthesis timbres through shaping and through reorganization and through kind of a smoothing of grains. Now, there's lots of methods of granular synthesis. If you're working in Ableton Live, if you're working in Max, or some other, more commonly used digital audio programs, and each kind of granular tool is going to be a little bit different, but it all kind of, centers around this basic idea of working with very tiny audio bits, anywhere really between 2 to 300 milliseconds is typical. And then by reordering them, stretching them, and pitch shifting them, you can come up with some really interesting results. So yeah, enjoy working with kind of basic granular synthesis in Alchemy.